Johnny Washington, a black teenager in Los Angeles, knows the freight yards like the back of his hand. He and his pals, Jay and Buddy, hit them often, stealing for a fence. They have to. They're the sole support of their families. But when Jay is killed by a security guard who gets his brains scattered by Buddy with nunchaku sticks, they are forced to look for other work. They find it with the underworld kings and Elliot Davis, but when Davis recruits Johnny's sister for a stable and later ODs her, Johnny and Buddy come on with a vengeance. Salutations, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4. The legal, the loyal, the regal, the royal, Ronin Ralph, your master of ceremonies. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Today on Ralph Reads, I continue with Donald Goines' very last novel, Inner City Hoodlum. Let's amp the suspense and let the reading commence. Chapter 8. The residential street was quiet. Only the blue lights of television sets emanated from each of the tiny white houses. Detectives Spence and Baker sat in their unmarked car down the street from the Washington house, watching it for the 6th straight night in a row. The only lead in the freight yard killing had come from Sam the Fence, and so far that lead had not panned out. Normally, the Washington boy would have been regarded as another teen gang member wanted for murder, but the pressure from city officials, combined with the panic at the freight yards, had forced Spence and Baker into around-the-clock surveillance. "Shit, Jim," Baker began. "We've been out here for the better part of our lives, and nothing." "Fucking crunch from upstairs, Tom. Those bastards want this case, and they'll do anything to get it." Spence was tired and anxious to get out onto the streets. His anxiety showed itself in his voice. "You know, we haven't even seen his sister. Johnny's supposed to have a little sister, and we haven't seen any sign of her. I wonder if there's some kind of connection." "Maybe," Spence replied flatly. "But the way things are going, it appears as if we'll never find out." "I just hope," Baker complained, "that this fucker breaks one way or the other pretty soon. I can't go through too much more of this shit." "Anything," Spence replied bitterly. "Anything would be better than this shit. God damn." And with that, both men fell into a deep silence, keeping their eyes pinned to the small white frame house for any sign of activity. The bureaucracy of the department had caught both detectives in a bind, and neither man had the power of rank to break out. It would be this way for the two normally active policemen until either the case broke or the men upstairs decided to chalk it up to another unsolved homicide. Either way, it would take time. As Detective Spence and Baker watched the little house, the telephone inside was ringing. Johnny's father looked to his wife, and she responded by lifting her heavy frame from the chair and moving slowly across the living room to answer the phone. "Hello?" Mrs. Washington spoke slowly and most hesitantly. "Mom, it's Johnny," the voice from the other end said. Mrs. Washington took a deep breath. She hadn't heard from her son in over a week, and combined with Leslie's running away, she had found herself withdrawing from the situation. "Mom, what's happening? Is everything all right?" Johnny's voice was edged with great apprehension.
"Yes, son. Everything's all right. Where are you?"
"I'm okay, Mom. You and Pop will be getting some money in a couple of days. I moved out with Buddy, and we're both working full-time. 2 jobs. So there's not much time for anything."
Uh-huh.
Mrs. Washington turned back toward her husband, but the man was sipping on a bottle of wine and not paying attention to the call. "Mom," Johnny began again, "let me talk to Leslie." Johnny's mother sighed, then gripped herself. She knew that if she told Johnny what Leslie had done, Johnny would be furious and disrupt the household. She would have to lie.
She's not here, Johnny.
"What do you mean she's not there?"
She went off to Grandma's for a week, son. Left yesterday."
"Oh." Johnny's voice expressed his disappointment. "Well, tell her I'll call when she gets back. Everything else okay?"
"Yeah, sure. Everything's fine. But, Johnny, one thing.
Johnny cut her off quickly. He knew exactly what she was going to say. "Okay, Mom, I'll send something to you sooner, all right?"
"Thanks, son. Your daddy's in a bad way this week, and things ain't so good."
"Okay, Mom, I dig it. You take care now, okay?"
"I will, Johnny. And you be careful too, all right?"
"Sure, Mom, I will." Johnny hung up his end, and his mother waited for the dial tone before replacing the receiver. She turned back to her husband and told him who had been on the phone. The old man nodded and grunted once, then proceeded to drain the remaining wine from his bottle. Mrs. Washington sat herself down in a torn old chair and felt herself drifting back into the comfortable fantasy land of the television set. Johnny Washington rested his hand on the telephone and looked around his two-bedroom apartment, lost in thought. Anita was sitting on the couch across from him, reading a book. Buddy and Jane, who shared the old upstairs apartment, were out eating, and the place was abnormally quiet. They had been living in the place for 5 days. Each night had been a party. But now there was something wrong, and Johnny could feel it in his blood. He knew that Leslie would not have gone to his grandmother's house in Santa Monica without telling him first. The tone of his mother's voice revealed the fact to him that she had been lying. As he started to dial the phone again, Anita looked up.
"Who you calling, babe?"
"My grandmother. Leslie hasn't been home for a week." Johnny stopped talking as the old woman answered on the other end. When Johnny had finally finished the conversation, he slammed the receiver down and stood up.
"Not there?"
Anita asked, already knowing the answer.
"Fucking bitch!"
Johnny shouted. "No telling what kind of shit she's gotten herself into! Man, why don't nobody watch her when I'm gone? Nobody, man, gives a good fucking shit!"
"Come on, baby, take it easy,"
Anita said soothingly, trying to calm her man down.
"Maybe everything's all right. Maybe she's got herself a boyfriend or something, you know."
"Shit!" Johnny exclaimed, ignoring the pretty black girl who watched him closely from the couch. "I don't even know where the hell to begin looking for her. God damn it!" Johnny knew deep down inside that something was wrong. The way he had seen his younger sister that morning after the killings, the way she had dressed, and the way she had looked like a woman, something had changed, and Johnny knew that she was in some kind of trouble.
"What are you gonna do, Johnny?"
Anita asked. "Look for her. I got 2 hours before me and Buddy make the rounds tonight. I'll spend that time to look."
"Honey,"
Anita began.
"she's not out there just walking the streets. There's no way you'll find her like that."
"Yeah, I know," Johnny said as he pulled on his jacket. "But I got to do something, babe. I just can't sit here." Anita watched Johnny as he stormed out of the apartment. The week they had just spent together had been a good one. There was plenty of food and plenty of love between the two young couples. But inside, Anita knew now that things were changing, and she began to fear what was coming. Johnny drove out of the parking lot of the apartment building and onto Central Avenue. He would head up to Adams, then turn right and cruise the busiest section of South Central Los Angeles. He knew that it was a futile search, but he had to make it. Maybe, just maybe, his sister was out in the streets with some dude. If Johnny found her with a man, he knew that he would kill him. 2 hours later, Johnny returned to the apartment and picked up Buddy. Anita had informed him of what had happened. As the two black youths headed towards their first pickup house, Buddy remained silent until they passed Santa Barbara Avenue and headed into a quiet residential neighborhood where the Numbers house was located. "Listen, my man," Buddy began. "I heard about Leslie. After tonight, you and me can start looking. Hit every fucking bar and club in town." "Hey," Johnny replied, "I dig where you're coming from, buddy, and I appreciate it. I'm so fucking uptight about her, I don't know what's coming down. I just don't have any ideas one way or the other, you dig? So maybe you're right, and we should just get out every chance we have and look." Buddy waited until Johnny had pulled up in front of the 2-story wooden house before replying, "Hey man, I'm with you all the way. Don't sweat. We'll find her." Johnny glanced at his friend and realized that he was lucky to have a guy like Buddy as a partner. "Yeah, buddy, I think we will." As Johnny got out of the car, he noticed for the first time the old Ford sitting in front of the Numbers house. The engine was still running, and clouds of exhaust poured from the tailpipes. Buddy was already halfway up the sidewalk when Johnny whistled to him to stop. "Hey man, you got your nunchaku?" Johnny yelled in a whisper. Buddy nodded, then walked back to where Johnny was standing. "What's happening?" "That car," Johnny said, pointing to the Ford. "I don't know, man, but something tells me things ain't exactly right on around here. Let's go in through the back." Buddy felt the adrenaline shoot through his veins. As he followed Johnny around the side of the old house, he unzipped his jacket and pulled out his nunchaku sticks. The tension and tightness of the young black always felt before using the nunchaku now gripped him. As Johnny crept around to the rear of the house, he silently wished himself that he had bought that .32 revolver he had seen just yesterday. The young black had never carried a gun, had never had a reason to. But now, working the routes for the Duke, he had become more and more inclined to carry a rod. It was always touch and go this late at night, and Johnny had begun to realize that almost anything might happen. The rear of the house was dark, except for one light coming from the kitchen. Johnny crawled on his hands and knees to the back door and lifted himself up slowly so that he could see into the kitchen. Inside, 2 tall black men in their late 20s stood with their backs to the rear door. Johnny could see the gun in one of the men's hands, and he could see the other one stashing the tape money into a velvet pouch. "It's a ripoff," Johnny whispered to Buddy. "Shit, what are we gonna do?" "They got their backs to us. The dude on the right has a gun. You get him first, and I'll take care of the other one, you dig?" Buddy nodded. Johnny glanced down at his friend's hands and saw Buddy gripping the nunchaku stick so tightly that his knuckles were turning white. "Okay, my man." Johnny reached up and grabbed the doorknob. Slowly, he twisted the knob until he had turned it all the way. He prayed that the door would open when he pushed. Otherwise, they will be dead men. One more glance down at Buddy, and Johnny pushed with all his strength against the door. The quiet scene inside the kitchen instantly broke into bedlam. The rear door struck both hold-up men and threw them off balance. The black man with the gun accidentally fired his weapon, and the bullet struck the forehead of the old, weather-beaten black man who had been tied up. The man's brains were seeping out of the gaping hole in his skull as he flew backward in his chair. The knots still held, and the butchered black man lay dying while still tied to the chair. Before the other robber with the money could react, Johnny was already on top of him, digging his fist into the man's black face. He had caught them off guard, and instantly Johnny was getting the first punches in. Within a matter of moments, the man's face was being transformed into a churning mass of fleshy pulp. The gunshot had triggered Buddy into action. He had barged into the kitchen with his nunchaku already arsing through the air. The moment the startled gunman had fired, he had crumpled beneath a tremendous blow from Buddy's clubs. The hardwood stick had struck the man between the neck and the shoulder blade, cracking that bone cleanly with a sickening crunch. The gunman went down instantly, splitting his skull on the corner of the table while his gun went flying across the room. Buddy stood over his felled victim, then noticed Johnny struggling with the other black man on the floor. Instantly, Buddy tightened his grip, shrieked, and dove at the feet of the man. Raising his nunchaku high above his head, Buddy whipped the free club down and around, hitting the man directly across his shin bones. The scream was inhuman as both the man's shin bones cracked at the same moment. A piece of bone from the left leg instantly dislocated and popped out through the victim's pants. The sickeningly white piece of marrow brought a wave of nausea in Buddy. "Shit, Johnny!" Buddy screamed as Johnny rolled off the fainting man and got to his feet. "Fucking nice work! Nice work, my man! Jesus!" Johnny felt exhilaration and complete fear as he examined the bodies inside the kitchen. The old man was still tied to his chair and his brains were splattered across the kitchen wall. The gunman lay crumpled and silent against the leg of the table, his skull bleeding profusely and his neck twisted in a grotesque clump of bone, flesh, and blood. The two black youths stood across the table from each other beneath the harsh white light. Buddy was still gripping his bloody nunchaku clubs, and his knuckles were still white. Johnny tried to get his mind together to figure out what to do next. On the table between them was a pile of money. Neither youth had ever seen so much money in the same place before. "You okay?" Johnny asked. "Yeah, Johnny, I guess so." "Shit." Buddy's voice was strained as the young man was trying to keep himself under control. Johnny looked down at the money, then back up at Buddy again. "My man," he began, "there's a lot of fucking money here." "I dig where you coming from, bro," Buddy replied, sweat making his brown face glisten beneath the light. "We could take the bread," Johnny said, thinking out loud. "Or we could call Duke. Man, it's a lot of coin here, but the Duke will know what went down. You'll dig on us, 'cause no one else in his organization uses the nunchaku." "Yeah, Johnny, we got too many fucking people after us already, man." Buddy was already shuffling the money back into the envelopes that were used for pickups. "Shit, man," Johnny said finally. "It's better to stick with a dude like the Duke. He'll take care of us, man. He's righteous." "Call him, man. Let's get this shit over with," Buddy said as he laid his bloody weapon down on the white tablecloth. Within a few moments, the Duke and his bodyguard Joe walked into the kitchen. The grisly scene before them did not affect either of the men visibly. Instead, a curled, sneering smile worked his way across Duke's mouth. "Oh, Amos, too fucking bad," Duke said when he saw the numbers man lying in the chair on the kitchen floor. The old black man's eyes were still opened, and Duke knelt down and pulled the eyelids shut. "Shit. We'll have to take care of his woman. Remember to do that, Joe." "Yes," Joe said, standing against the rear door and staring closed-mouthed at the dead bodies strewn about the kitchen. Both Buddy and Johnny stood nervously against one wall. They hardly knew what to expect from the Duke, anger or gratitude. It was tough to figure out how the big man would react. Finally, Duke rose from the side of the old man and surveyed the two dead robbers who had tried to rip off his numbers house. The effects of Buddy's ability with the nunchaku were visible on both men. Duke then turned away from the dead men and leaned over the table. He poured the money out of the envelopes and made a quick count. "Shit, it's all there." Johnny felt relieved instantly. He had hoped the count would be right. It would have been trouble had the money been short. The Duke would have suspected both boys of taking something off the top. "Boys," Duke began, now smiling, "you did some mighty fine shit here. It's been a fucking long time since I've seen two young dudes who could handle themselves like you studs. I dig it." Johnny and Buddy looked at each other quickly, each one thinking the same thing. The fact that they had stumbled onto the robbery had turned out to be a good break. They had proven themselves to the Duke, and now the big man was seeing the evidence of their work. Duke turned back to the money and counted out $500 in 2 stacks. He slid the money across the table to Johnny and Buddy. "Here, you dudes have saved me more than this. A little bonus never hurt anyone, and I'm going to do everything within my power to keep you guys in my outfit." Thanks, Mr. Duke, Johnny said, as both he and Buddy scooped up the money. Listen, I want you guys to come back to my apartment for a little refreshment and some fun. Johnny felt his blood surge. Duke's apartment was one of those places in the ghetto that very few dudes had ever visited. Rumors were rampant about what went down in the man's little nest above the Paradise Room, and everyone who knew about the Duke had one idea or another as to what happened inside that apartment. Now, because of what had come down here, he and Buddy would be able to spend some hours with the man inside his famous apartment. Joe, Duke began, I'll take these men back to my pad. I want you to call the boys and clean this fucking mess up. You know what to do with the stiffs, and remember to call Amos's old lady and lay it on her.
Okay, boss.
Joe stepped aside as Duke led Johnny and Buddy through the rear door and out around the house toward his waiting Cadillac. As the three approached the car, the Duke stopped. Shit, he began, remembering that he didn't have a driver any longer. Either of you want to do the fucking driving? Buddy jumped quickly. Sure, I'll do it. Beautiful. Let's make it. As Johnny and Buddy rode through the dark streets of Watts in the luxurious Cadillac, both black youths were experiencing something that had only been a dream in the past. They were riding in a Cadillac with the top man in the city on their way to his pad for a party to celebrate the job they had done. Johnny almost laughed out loud, thinking that only a week before he and Buddy were fleeing the police with nowhere to go and no prospects for the future. It had been some fucking week, Johnny thought to himself as he stretched his legs out on the carpeted floor of the Cadillac. As Duke made his way through the Paradise Room with Johnny and Buddy, he ordered Al the bartender to send up a quart of Jack Daniels to his apartment. Johnny and Buddy both felt the stares of the men and the women as they walked 2 paces behind the big man. Everyone in the darkly lit room knew the 2 youths were being given the special treatment by Duke. Man, Buddy whispered as they reached the stairway, this is too fucking much. I take it, Buddy, Johnny replied, taking the steps 2 at a time, following the Duke's huge strides. I even forgot that shit that went down tonight. You know where I'm coming from, Buddy said. Johnny stopped halfway up the stairs and turned toward his longtime friend. What Buddy said had struck a chord. They had killed 2 black men only hours before. Men who might under other conditions have been friends of theirs. The thought had been working at Johnny's mind all evening, and now as Buddy admitted that the killings were no longer on his mind, Johnny felt the same fear he had felt just after the 2 men had died. Hey, my man, Buddy exclaimed, seeing the worried expression on Johnny's face. What's happening? Nothing, man, Johnny said quietly. I guess everything's just changed, that's all. Yeah, but it's a groove! Duke was standing at the top of the stairs waiting on the 2 young black men. What the shit, gentlemen? You gonna help me with that bottle or not? Johnny and Buddy scampered up the remaining stairs and followed Duke down the hallway and into the man's apartment. Jenny was sitting on the couch wearing a very sheer negligee. Her breasts and her creamy thighs were visible. Johnny and Buddy both stopped short when they saw the half-naked teenager. Hey, baby, Duke began easily. Sorry about not pulling your coat to what was coming down, but don't worry, 'cause these dudes are cool. You just stay where you are and help us celebrate a little. Jenny looked from Johnny to Buddy with her large brown eyes. She made a hasty attempt to put a negligee around herself. Okay, men, just have yourselves a seat and let's talk. Duke went into the kitchen, cracked some ice, and poured the brown whiskey into tall glasses, filling each one almost all the way. As Johnny waited for his drink, he tried to pull together the strange thoughts that were running through his mind. The sight of the very young girl sitting on the couch had startled him. He knew that she was no older than himself and that he'd probably seen her around the streets. At first, that was all that bothered him. Just the fact that Duke didn't have an older woman, but instead kept a black teenager. "Hey, Washington!" Duke exclaimed as he strode across the room holding out a glass of whiskey. "Drink this shit and let's see if you got soul." Johnny took the drink and waited until Buddy had drained over half his glass before sipping. He had never liked whiskey. The taste had always made him gag. Now, however, it was different. He felt the soothing warmth of the drink, then felt his entire body relax. Up until that first swig, he hadn't realized just how tense and uptight he had been. As Duke sat across from Buddy and spoke about the technique of using the nunchaku, Johnny slid into a large, overstuffed chair and sipped at his drink. Jenny watched him intently from her position on the couch.
"You and the Duke hit it off real good,"
the young girl said, trying to sound sexy and mature. "Yeah, things were tough tonight," Johnny replied, finding his eyes glued to the young girl's exposed breasts.
"Duke will treat you real nice if you do things for him."
"Uh-huh. Suppose you're right."
"I know I'm right, honey."
Jenny smiled, then shifted herself on the couch so that her breasts and thighs were almost nude. Johnny gulped at his whiskey and thought about Anita. He wished he was back at their apartment, curling up in bed with his beautiful girlfriend. But he knew that he couldn't leave the Duke at a time like this. The whiskey began to take its toll on Johnny, and the image of the people in the room became blurred and unreal. Johnny settled and allowed his mind to wander. At one point, almost asleep from the drugging effect of the alcohol and the emotional fatigue suffered because of the killings, Johnny almost imagined that the half-naked, brown-skinned girl sitting on the couch was his sister. The thought made him bolt upright and join in the conversation with Duke and Buddy. They talked for over an hour about the various ways a man could be killed with the nunchaku sticks. Chapter 9. The young black girl who left the apartment with the older black woman looked beautiful. She was dressed in a pink miniskirt with a tight-fitting sweater. Her hair was worn high. She walked a little unsteadily, and there was a sheen to her dark skin common amongst people experiencing the heat of drugs. But aside from that, she was a beautiful sight.
"Molly,"
Leslie said as she walked down the courtyard of the apartment building.
"I just don't know." "Yes, you do, honey,"
Molly replied, taking Leslie's thin arm and leading her toward the waiting car.
"This whole thing's for Duke. It's all you got, baby, and you better take it."
Leslie nodded rather absently as she climbed into the back seat of the car. Molly squeezed in next to her and nodded toward Joe. The tall, bald Negro turned around and looked at Leslie. His wide grin expressed what he thought of her.
"To the house, Molly?"
"Yeah, Joe, to the house."
As Joe pulled away from the curb, Molly leaned back in the plush seat of the Cadillac. Her mind traveled back a week in time to when she had first started bringing Leslie out. The first couple of days had been difficult ones with the young, disappointed girl. When Duke had failed to show that first night, Leslie had become impossible. Even though Molly had started her on the hard stuff, just snorting it every few hours, the young teenager had failed to calm herself. She had taken to fits of anger, throwing things around the apartment, and screaming out at anyone, including Molly, who happened to be present. Molly remembered Leslie as she would break down and curse out loud at her parents, then pick up the nearest object and throw it as hard as she could across the room, then finally break down and cry. It was after these outbursts that Molly would bring the girl a spoonful of the white powder and tell her to snort it. The reaction to the heroin was slow in coming. Molly had figured that within 3, maybe 4 days, the young girl will embrace the drug and begin to use it steadily as a mean of alleviating her pain. But it had taken longer, and as day after day went by, Molly had begun to realize that she was dealing with a very strong young woman. But Molly had reasoned the strong ones were always the best once they were turned out. The weak ones would usually become apathetic to their trade, and the white men who came to the house for a little jungle pussy, quote-unquote, demanded screamers and wild action. The ones who just lay there and took it were what most of these men were trying to get away from. So Molly figured that she would wait it out with Leslie until the teenager became mellow enough to handle the situation. At that point, Molly would take her to the house and start her out in what would become her life's work. Joe drove through the dark, empty streets of South Central Los Angeles along Manchester Boulevard until he hit the freeway. Then he turned onto the Harbor Freeway and headed north toward the city center. The skyscrapers stood lighted and shining above the rest of the city, giving their promise, false as it was, of bright lights and happy people. Leslie watched the skyline as though it were a movie. She looked about herself, to Molly, then to Joe, and almost laughed. She knew where she was going and what she was going to do when she got there. She knew that she would be paid excellent money to offer her young brown body to white men. She knew that in her mind, and she also knew that she was developing a habit, finding it essential to keep a steady intake of the white powder going in order to preserve the flow of what was becoming her life. It was all like a dream, because as in a dream, she knew all these things in her mind, but her emotions were not reacting to them. Some portion of her brain had been cut off and did not allow her to take any kind of direct action. It seemed that all she could do anymore was receive. Just lie back and receive. It was an unusual frame of mind for the normally bright girl to be in. But as each day passed, Leslie was becoming more and more used to it. At 6th Street, Joe pulled off the freeway and drove past the brightly lit Statler Hilton Hotel. About a half block down from the huge building, he turned left onto Bradbury Street and immediately pulled the long black Cadillac up into the steep driveway. The old shingled house was 3 stories high, with a 6-foot-high stone fence surrounding it. The lights that emanated from the windows were low-keyed and a multitude of colors.
"Well, honey,"
Molly began, lighting up a cigarette,
"how do you like your new home?"
a middle-aged white man in a business suit walked out of the front door of the house before Leslie could respond. The customer peered inside the Cadillac as he walked down the driveway and out onto the street. Leslie turned her head and watched the man get into a taxicab and drive off.
"Well, honey, I asked you a question." "Fine,"
Leslie murmured, already feeling the pleasant rush from the heroin wearing off.
"That's good, honey, 'cause you're gonna be here for some time."
The relief in Molly's voice was evident. The middle-aged black woman was happy to get rid of the troublesome teenager. She had liked Leslie at first, but since she had taken so long and had been so much trouble, Molly had had enough. Now, all she wanted was to get back to her apartment, shoot up a packet, and give her boyfriend a call.
"Yeah," thought Molly, "maybe we'll go dancing or something." "Molly, please."
Leslie's voice was tinged with panic.
"I don't think I want to. Couldn't we just go see Duke right now?" "Oh, honey, shit. I told you about Duke and his ways, but don't worry none, 'cause you'll see him soon enough."
Molly knew that the Duke's practice was to take a flock of girls to the Paradise Room at least twice a month. He did this just to show them he still cared, and it usually worked, at least on the still naive ones.
"Yeah, I know, but I want to see him now."
Molly was losing her patience. Instead of waiting for Gloria, the madame inside the house, to give the signal that it was clear to come inside, Molly slammed open her door and jumped out of the car. Leslie remained motionless in the back seat.
"Joe, couldn't you take me?"
Leslie asked the silent driver. The big dark-skinned man shook his head.
No way, girl. The Duke's way's the only way.
"Come on, Leslie. Get your ass out of there."
Molly was opening the door on Leslie's side. Finally, once again, Leslie felt herself being overtaken. She climbed out of the car and took a deep breath of the night air.
"You'll dig Gloria, baby,"
Molly was saying as she led Leslie by the arm up the walkway and onto the front porch. 3 knocks and the door swung open.
"Shit, Molly. Fortunate no one's out here, 'cause you know how upset these motherfucking honkies can get,"
Gloria yelled.
Sorry, Gloria, but we got a bitch here who's gonna get them a lot more upset, only in the right way.
Gloria pulled both women inside the house and led them through the immaculate red velvet carpeted room, plush with a large couch and an oak desk and photographs on the walls of 12 beautiful Negro women. There, Gloria said as she closed the door behind her. Don't want those fucking honkies to shoot their rocks before they pay. For the first time, Leslie got a good look at the madame. Her hair was dyed an extreme shade of orange, and her eye makeup was the same color. Her clothes were expensive, but didn't succeed in hiding the middle-aged wrinkles and bulges. Leslie disliked the woman immediately. She felt that she was dressed up only to please the white man. Not bad, Molly, Gloria said after examining Leslie up and down.
She's really a fine bitch. We'll pull in 100 a shot. That's what Duke figured, Gloria. At least that. Fine.
Gloria looked directly at Leslie, and Leslie stared back.
Leslie, you're gonna dig it here, 'cause we treat our girls fine. And then when the Duke comes by and takes you out on the town, well, that's when you'll be treated even finer.
Leslie started at the mention of the Duke's name. It was the one thing left she had to hold on to now. Nothing else existed for her anymore.
If the man would just come and take me back,
thought Leslie,
I'll be okay. Everything will be all right then, when the Duke comes for me. She's got it bad, Molly, Gloria said in a soft, almost tender voice. All the bitches from Duke's place got it bad. We got it bad, didn't we?
Gloria smiled, and Leslie couldn't help but see the bitterness etched into her face. The black woman seemed for a moment to be on the verge of tears, but then she broke out of it quickly.
Well,
Gloria said loudly,
let's get this young filly fucking them white dudes with all the change.
As Leslie was led from the room by Gloria, she heard Molly laughing loudly behind her. His name was Jack, and he was middle-aged and white. After setting Leslie up in an upstairs room, Gloria had brought Jack around for his fling with the beautiful teenage black girl.
This here's Jack, Leslie. You treat him real fine, you hear?
Gloria had said, with a definite change in her voice.
Yes, ma'am,
Leslie replied absently, feeling the heavy-set white man's eyes stripping her. Gloria, Jack said with a big grin on his face, you've outdone yourself this time. She's just what I wanted.
That's good, Jack, baby, so long as you're willing to pay.
Jack laughed loudly as Gloria left the room. His belly shook and his face flushed crimson as he closed the door behind her. Then he turned back to face the beautiful young girl who stood across the room waiting. For an instant, Leslie felt a surge of panic grip her being. The room was small, only with a bed, a bathroom, and a small table as furnishings. The drapes, the walls, the carpet were all done in a bright red color and made the cubicle seem even smaller. Don't be afraid, baby. Daddy'll take care of you, all right. Jack walked across the room and stood across from the trembling girl. Leslie smelled the whiskey on the man's breath and his thick, sweet cologne. She wanted to collapse, to faint, so that she would not be obligated to do anything with him. But that was impossible. Before being brought to the room, Gloria had made sure the novice girl had had a strong hit of smack just to keep her nerves calm and mellow. Leslie had taken the white powder gratefully, feeling her muscles relax and her mind begin to mellow. And now there was no reaction to what was happening inside the girl. Once again, she was at the mercy of those around her, virtually unable to react. That's better, honey. You just be real nice and easy, and everything will be fine. Jack stroked her hair, and Leslie felt his hand move down her neck, then across her collarbone. When he dropped down to the middle portion of her body and cupped her young breasts, she sighed. "Aw, yeah," Jack exclaimed. "That's much better, much better." His hands were all over her now, and Leslie leaned back against the wall and allowed him to touch her wherever he wished. He pulled her slinky dress from her shoulder, and her nude breasts were firmly cupped in his hands. As he lowered the garment past her waist and over her hips, Leslie reached down and helped him. Jack stopped, surprised at her sudden enthusiasm. "You take a while, honey," he began in a hoarse whisper, "but when you get the idea, you really go, don't you?" Leslie just smiled vacantly and nodded as she stepped out of her dress, then slid her silken panties down and stepped out of them. She stood completely naked in front of this hard-breathing white man and waited. "Oh yeah, fantastic," Jack mumbled over and over and over again as he tore at his clothes. When he was nude, Leslie glanced down at his hard pink prick and shuddered. The heroine was coming on strong now, and she was losing touch with what was going on around her. The room softened, and even Jack's presence did not seem to matter anymore. Everything was cool again. There was no need to do anything but to engage yourself. Jack took the black girl into his arms and kissed her passionately. He was breathing hard, and his movements were jerky and almost confused. But Leslie was so loose and pliant that she seemed to melt into each gesture he made. In a moment, they were on the red satin bedspread, Leslie lying spread eagle beneath the large man. His presence was justified in her mind only by the memory of Duke. Everything else had ceased to exist. "Oh, baby! Oh, baby!" Jack said repeatedly as he pushed his sex deep into Leslie's tight little vagina. The man was sweating profusely, and he was gripping the sides of the bed as he struggled to keep himself from coming too soon. But his efforts failed, and after only a few strokes, he moaned loudly and collapsed on top of the girl's young brown body. Leslie held the heaving man against her, turning her head away from his red-flushed face. All she could think of at the moment was Duke. With a little effort and a little imagination, she almost convinced herself that the man lying between her legs was actually Duke. It was a satisfying fantasy, and she allowed herself to engage in it as long as she could hold it. Chapter 10. The regulars at the Paradise Room had come to regard the two black youths as Duke's special men, and Johnny and Buddy were treated accordingly. Al, the bartender, never charged them for drinks, but just told them that the Duke wanted it that way. The women who were constantly coming into the place were overly friendly to the two young men, virtually offering their services to them for free. As it stood, the Duke very rarely had taken to new members of his outfit as readily and as wholeheartedly as he had with Johnny and Buddy. The man had been looking for young, fresh blood for a long time, and the duo of black youths who had saved him countless thousands, while at the same time demonstrating their ability to take care of themselves, had convinced the Duke that he had found his young protégés. But Johnny had been the one to whom Duke had been especially favorable. The tall, lean, black youth exhibited an uncanny sense of the streets and a great ability to handle men. It wasn't until the discussion with Buddy after the night of the killings that Duke learned that Johnny had been the one to teach Buddy the use of the nunchaku. Apparently, Johnny was even more adept with the sticks than was Buddy, and that was another favorable comment in his favor. 5 days had passed since the killings, and both Johnny and Buddy knew that they were on their way up inside Duke's little ghetto kingdom. They were the youngest members of the man's gang, yet they were both regarded as the brightest prospects around. It was late on a cold Saturday night, then, as Buddy and Johnny sat in the living room of their apartment and discussed the events that had transpired during the last few weeks. Anita and Jane had taken the weekend to visit Anita's grandmother in Santa Monica, so the two youths were alone. They sat across from each other, listening to the stereo and drinking some Jack Daniels, another token of Duke's high regard. "Yeah, buddy," Buddy said with a metal tone to his voice that Johnny had never heard. "We come a long way in a short time. My fucking head's still swimming." Johnny regarded his close friend carefully. The days had shown their effect on Buddy, and it frightened Johnny. The night after the killing, Johnny had sensed a strange, cold calm inside his friend that he had never seen before. To even think that his childhood buddy should grow up to become a cold, calculating killer sent chills down Johnny's spine. The hitmen and the killers had always been other places, older men, and a part of a young man's rich fantasy life. "Yeah, man," Johnny began after a long pause. "It's been out of sight, except for the killings." Buddy looked directly at his friend and smiled a cruel, deadly smile. "Really? It stopped bothering me after that fucking guard at the yards?" "Sure, man, I know, but fuck, it's a damn bitch to knock somebody off. You dig where I'm coming from?" "Yeah, I guess I do, Johnny, but it wasn't like we were hired or nothing like that. I mean, we were involved in some heavy fucking shit, you know that. We killed 3 men, buddy. A white dude and 2 brothers, man. You dig that? 2 brothers with black skin. Guys like us who were just trying to rip off some bread, man. You know what I mean? I just can't see where they had to die for that." Buddy let out a short laugh and drank steadily from his glass of whiskey. "Fuck, Johnny, you're the man who laid that down that night. We could have just split, you know?" "Split," Johnny said vacantly, lost in his own thoughts. Yeah, they could have split, but it had been one of those moments when everything seemed to fall into place. The opportunity had presented itself, and Johnny had grabbed it. His quickness had made his decision for him, but it had not forewarned him of the consequences. Although he never showed it except at times like these when he was alone with Buddy, Johnny Washington felt a sickening remorse over the killings. "Goddamn, man," Buddy yelled. "You fucking look like the world's caving in. What say you and I make it down to the Paradise, have a few drinks, and have a few laughs with some of those broads?" Buddy was already up and putting on his jacket before Johnny could even answer. It did sound like a good idea. Their work was finished for the night, and sitting around in the lonely apartment will only make Johnny feel worse. "Okay, my man, I guess we do have some celebrating coming to us." Johnny went into his room and brought out his best suede coat. "Shit, man," Buddy whistled. "You do mean business tonight, don't you?" The 2 boys stormed out of the apartment, anxious to lose themselves in the noisy, crowded bar where they knew they were welcomed. Saturday night at the Paradise Room was the biggest night of the week. The working blacks, along with the hustlers and street people, all made it by. Some of the people were old friends who had grown up together, while others just dropped in for some good whiskey and conversation. As Johnny and Buddy entered the smoke-filled room, they were both greeted by Joe. He was working as doorman whenever the Duke was enjoying himself inside. Joe knew the face of every man in the country who might be out to hit the Duke. Screening people was the huge black man's job, and so far he had been quite successful. Al slipped the 2 boys a bottle of Jack Daniels as they walked along the bar toward the rear of the room. Smiling, the bartender said, "Duke's in the back. He's got some mighty fine stuff back there with him." "Yeah, baby," Buddy exclaimed. "Let's go back, man. I could use a little tonight," Johnny said as he led the way toward the rear of the crowded room. Already he was feeling better. The thoughts and torment that had begun earlier in his apartment were now disappearing. Everything was clearing up, and it would be a wild, groovy night. Pushing through the crowd, the young men had made their way through the large booth that rested at the far corner of the club. The booth itself was raised on the wooden platform so that Duke could survey his club-goers as he drank and partied. Johnny and Buddy finally skirted the dance floor and stood directly in front of the man's raised booth. "Hey, gentlemen, what's happening?" the Duke smiled, then drew the 2 very young black girls sitting on each side of him closer. He kissed each girl on the cheek, then turned his attention back toward the two young blacks standing in front of the booth. "Johnny, Buddy, you dudes look like you need a little action. Just hop in, boys, and we'll see what the fuck we can do about it." Buddy had already seated himself in the booth when he realized that something was wrong. Johnny stood directly in front of the table, staring up at the young girl seated on the Duke's right. Buddy leaned forward and moaned loudly when he saw who it was. "Leslie?" Johnny's mouth seemed to hardly move, and the word died in the deafening noise of the club. "Johnny," Duke began, not knowing what was happening. "You all right, my man?" This time, Johnny shrieked at the top of his lungs. Leslie's name bellowed forth, and everyone in the club stopped what they were doing and turned toward the source. Johnny was visibly trembling now, and he gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles were turning white. "You know this bitch?" Duke asked, trying to work out whatever was wrong. "Well, just slide in here, man, and you can play a little, you dig?" By the time it had dawned on Leslie that her older brother was standing directly in front of her as if in a dream, he had been transformed from just another young black man into someone she felt strongly for. The image had finally taken shape, and she had recognized him as her brother. Yet, even with the emotion she felt somewhere deep inside, she could not react to his presence. "What have you done with her?" Johnny demanded of Duke. The big man shrugged his shoulders and tried to smile. The proximity of Buddy, along with Johnny's anger, alerted Duke to danger. He looked quickly across the room and with relief saw Joe pushing through the crowd of onlookers. "I asked you a fucking question, Duke. I want to know what you done to Leslie." "Man," Duke began, "I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, if you know the bitch or something, just be cool and we can work something out for the night." Johnny's anger at seeing his sister sitting alongside Duke with a blank, almost pitiful expression on her face was getting out of control. His first thought had been of the young girl he had seen in Duke's apartment the night of the killings. She was sitting on the other side of the man. The question as to what had happened to his sister was now answered, and the answer blinded Johnny with rage. "Come on, Leslie, I'm taking you home." Johnny reached into the booth and tried to grab his sister's hand, but the strong arm of Joe reached in with him and pulled him back. "Now listen, man," Duke began. "What the fuck is going down?" Johnny took a deep breath, hoping that he wouldn't break out into sobs when he spoke. "That's my sister!" he screamed loud enough for everyone in the place to hear. Suddenly, Duke's expression faded and was replaced by a look of genuine shock. He was as astonished as Johnny was angry. "I said," Johnny repeated, this time loud and clear, "that she's my sister." "What you doing with her?" Buddy had slid out of the booth as soon as he had spotted Leslie. He now stood beside Johnny, facing the Duke. Joe towered over the two young men and still held Johnny's arm tightly. "Listen, my man," Duke reasoned. "This is the big fucking world here, and your sister decided to join it. Ain't nothing I could do about it, Johnny, except try and make it easier for her. That's all." "You motherfucking bastard!" The words were screamed out as Johnny pulled himself away from Joe and flung himself across the table directly at Duke. His first punch caught the man directly behind his left ear and sent him spinning against Leslie. Meanwhile, Buddy had taken Joe and kneed him hard in the groin. The big man stood there with his legs tightly clasped and his hand on his balls. He glowered down at Buddy and waited as though he had all day in which to strike back. Buddy was standing across from him, not knowing what to do. His nunchaku had bid his lifetime, but he had failed to bring the sticks to the club with him. He was virtually defenseless without them. The Duke, at this moment, was lying down on the seat, with Leslie and the other young girl screaming and crying. Johnny was lying on the table, beating the man with his strong fists, but the blows hardly touched the Duke as the big man just retreated into the wound position and guarded his skull with his arms. Time seemed suspended during those first few moments, but when two of Duke's bodyguards realized that their man was being attacked, they immediately plunged through the excited crowd toward the man's table. One of the bodyguards, a huge 6'6" black-skinned man named Jonah, grabbed Johnny's legs and virtually lifted him off the table. In one swift motion, the giant of a man threw Johnny against the wall. Johnny hit the wood with a sickening thud, and his body crumpled like a rag doll as he slumped to the floor. The other bodyguard, a stocky 6-footer named Stu, came at Buddy. He looked at the fear in the young man's eyes and laughed. "You little black fatso! You're dead, boy!" Buddy tried to run, but the black man grabbed him by the shoulder, flung him against the table, and buried his fist into Buddy's face. At that moment, everything went blank for the two young men who had been so highly touted by the Duke. "Get the motherfuckers out of here!" Duke demanded.
How, boss?
Joe asked, looking at his boss with the question in his eyes. Normally, both Johnny and Buddy would have been taken for a long ride out into the desert north of Los Angeles. There, each would have received a slug from a .45 caliber pistol in the temple. The bodies then would have been doused with gasoline and cremated on the spot. In the Mojave Desert, no one would have noticed. "No, man," Duke replied after thinking about the alternatives. "Just dump the motherfuckers across town. When they find their way back, maybe they'll be more willing to accept things as they are around here." The moment he gave the order, Duke felt a knot grip his stomach as though someone had actually buried a knife inside his gut. He knew that he was making a mistake by not having the two young black men killed. But something inside Duke, whether it was pity or understanding, told him that everything would work out. He knew how difficult it was for a brother to accept what had happened to Leslie, but it wasn't the end of the world. Duke felt that Johnny's outrage was just temporary, and that in time the young man would come around.
You sure, boss?
Joe asked again as the bodyguards were carrying Johnny and Buddy out through the kitchen and into the alleyway. "Yeah, goddammit, I'm sure! Just make sure you leave them alone, fucking walk home!" Joe shook his head, then trudged out after the bodyguards. Duke turned back to his club. The people were standing across the dance floor, still watching, some talking among themselves. "All right, people, can you dig drinks on the house?" The people cheered as Al began to set up the liquor. Suddenly, Saturday night had returned to the Paradise Room. Leslie watched the club come back to life. She had watched her brother attack the man she loved, then had witnessed her brother's clubbing by the bodyguard. She had felt ashamed and spaced when her brother had first shown, and now she felt confused and sorry. She didn't know what she was sorry for, but the feeling was complete and powerful. "Hey, baby, you all right?" Duke asked her.
"I need something, Duke. Please. I need it real bad."
Duke smiled. "Sure, baby, Duke'll fix it for you. He always does, doesn't he?" Leslie nodded. Duke leaned down and kissed her gently on the cheek. Joe drove the Cadillac speedily through the Saturday night crowds of Los Angeles. He took Manchester Boulevard straight through the center of the city, finally ending up at Hermosa Beach. When he reached the first public parking lot, he turned into the expansive area and stopped the car. The two bodyguards sat with Johnny and Buddy in the back seat.
"This is it, man,"
Joe said slowly. "Yeah, baby," Jonah replied. "I still think we coming from the wrong way, Joe. You dig what I'm saying?"
"I could dig it, man,"
Joe replied.
"But this is the shit the Duke laid down, and there's nothing we can do about it."
Both Johnny and Buddy were conscious by now, and they listened with thumping hearts to the conversation in the car. Johnny knew that, after the attack on Duke, he had put his life in jeopardy, but he desperately wanted to remain alive so that somehow he could get back at the big man who had caused his sister so much harm. Now, that was the only thing he was living for. "Shit, man," Jonah continued. "These dudes are going to lay some heavy shit on Duke. We ought to do a man a favor, Joe. Save him from future hassle."
"I know,"
Joe replied.
"The man's making a big mistake. Anybody could have told him that. But he got to have his reasons, and he was never wrong before."
"There's always a first time, Joe. Always." Jonah had wanted badly to kill the young dudes who had been such a hit with the Duke. Besides being dangerous, they were competition, and the huge black man hated competition.
"Well, man,"
Joe said,
"get these fuckers out of here and let's make it."
The night had been long, and Joe's temper was running short. Before the incident at the club, he had set himself up with a fine-looking bitch, but Johnny and Buddy had caused his plans to be abandoned, and Joe hated them for that.
"Okay, fuckers, split!"
Joe now opened the door and slid out. He took Buddy with him and dumped the stocky young black onto the concrete. Johnny came next, being pushed across the seat by Stu and dumped alongside his friend. Before either boy could regain his senses, Joe was screeching away into the night. "Shit, Buddy, you all right, man?" Johnny asked. Buddy was lying face down on the concrete. Blood was pouring from his nose and his eyes were swollen. He groaned once, then sat up. "Yeah, Johnny, I think so. I wish you would have brought those goddamn nunchaku sticks. Man, what a drag!" Johnny was rubbing the side of his face where he had slammed into the wall. His jawbone felt sore as hell, and he could barely close his mouth. "I'm sorry, man," Buddy said. "About Leslie. Shit, man. That's a fucking bummer." Johnny got to his feet, holding himself erect as the ground swirled around him. Finally, he was stable. "Come on, man. We got to get the fuck out of here. The Fuzz are still looking for us. We got to get back to the apartment." After helping Buddy to his feet, the two black youths began walking across the parking lot. Suddenly, Johnny stopped and turned back toward the ocean. "You know, Buddy, I haven't seen the ocean in 10 fucking years." "Yeah," Buddy replied. "I remember the day. We felt like fucking assholes out there. All those honkies trying to get their skin like ours. That was too much." Johnny laughed bitterly. "Come on, man, let's go. We got a long night ahead of us." They retraced the route that Joe had taken in bringing them out to the beach. Walking along Manchester, they followed the back alleys, staying always off the main, well-lit street. Whenever they saw a car, they would duck behind anything available and wait for the passing car to get out of their sight. They stumbled and they cursed their way through the miles and miles and miles of endless alleyways, seeming always that they would never reach their destination. Finally, after 5 hours of walking, they reached the Harbor Freeway. They stood under the Manchester overpass and took a smoke. "My feet are falling off, man," Buddy complained as he rubbed the bottom of his feet. "Yeah, I know, man," Johnny replied, drawing heavily on his cigarette. "But we got to figure where we going. I mean, Duke knows where we live, don't he? And what happens if Joe and the other two decided that we should be killed?" "I don't know." "I do," Buddy said, "'cause if I don't fall into a bed pretty soon, I'm gonna die anyway." "Okay," Johnny agreed. "Let's make it back to the fucking pad and we'll figure things out, alright?" Buddy knew what Johnny was talking about. He knew that the situation was not going to be left alone by his good friend. What Duke had done to them was one thing, but what he had done to Leslie was another altogether. Johnny was out for revenge, Buddy realized, and he wouldn't stop until he got it. The idea frightened Buddy, but he felt loyal to his friend and knew that he would have to stick by him no matter how crazy he got. They walked as the sun rose in the east of Los Angeles. It was a cold, cloudy morning, and by the time the two young black men staggered up the stairs to their apartment, they were weary and exhausted. While the rest of Los Angeles was either sleeping or preparing to attend church services, Buddy and Johnny climbed gratefully into their beds. Buddy fell asleep instantly without undressing, but Johnny lay stone still on his bed, staring up at the ceiling. His mind was still working furiously, trying to figure out a way to get his sister back and to pay Duke the debt he now owed him. It was now dark, and Johnny opened his eyes slowly and saw Anita standing over him. She had a worried look on her face.
"What happened, Johnny?"
"Nothing, babe," Johnny answered, still groggy from sleep and in need of a good meal. "Just go into the kitchen there and fix some food, okay?"
"Sure, honey, whatever you say. Eggs, bacon, and toast all right?"
"Uh-huh, sounds fine." Johnny started to get off the bed, but his muscles had tightened so badly that he was almost paralyzed. Anita watched him intensely, fear growing stronger in her eyes.
"Oh, baby, what did they do to you?"
"A little trouble, Anita. That's all you have to know. Now go fix the food. Me and Buddy are starving." Anita leaned down and kissed him on the forehead, then turned and walked out of the room. Johnny struggled with his sore and aching body. He finally managed to pull himself into a sitting position, then swing his legs around and stand up next to the bed. The aches were severe, but he knew that nothing was broken. Buddy was already sitting at the kitchen table, drinking a hot cup of coffee. He tried to smile at Johnny, but his face just twisted up into a grotesque mask. "Man," Johnny said jokingly, "you do look wasted." "If I look bad, Johnny, then you must look like hell." The two laughed as Johnny took his seat across from Buddy. "Where's your chick, Buddy?" Johnny asked. "She's staying out of Santa Monica, man. Another couple of days. Ain't that right, Anita?" Anita flipped an egg in the frying pan before answering.
"Yeah, Jane loved it there. She wants us all to go out there for a while, and spend some time."
Johnny jumped at the idea. It would be a perfect place for him and Buddy to hide out. No one knew it existed except for Anita and Buddy. No one would know where they were while he and Buddy carried through the plan that had developed in his mind throughout the long morning hours. "Beautiful. Let's make it out there. Me and Buddy do need a little vacation."
"Oh, Johnny, you mean it?"
Anita was excited. She had wanted to ask Johnny about going out there, but was afraid that he would turn her down.
"Really, Johnny? You and me, Buddy and Jane? We'll have ourselves a regular ball."
"Sure, Anita. It'll be a gas." Johnny glanced quickly at Buddy as Anita wrapped her arms around his neck. Their eyes met, and both men knew that there were other things coming down besides a vacation. Johnny then turned back to Anita and hugged her playfully. He felt sorry because he knew that it would be a long time and a lot of luck before the two of them would really be able to take a vacation and just have some fun. But Anita always wanted to see San Francisco, and Johnny decided that after he had taken care of his business, he would make sure she got to the city by the bay. Maybe, he thought, maybe take Leslie up, too. Even though Johnny and Buddy were bruised, the threesome riding in the old Buick across town toward Santa Monica looked to all intents and purposes like a very happy group of teenagers out for a Sunday ride. As a matter of fact, the three were happy inside the spacious confines of the old car. Anita had turned on the rock station, and all three were singing along to the songs. As Johnny sang, he watched the passing scenery of South Central Los Angeles. It seemed to hit him during the moments when the music was playing. He had come so far, and yet he had gotten nowhere. As he looked about him, he realized that everything was still the same. The buildings were still there. The music coming over the radio, everything. People were proudly sitting around throughout the city having a peaceful Sunday morning, looking forward to something in the future that did not involve killing and danger. As he looked at Anita and Buddy singing happily, he felt more alone than he had in his entire life. Anita's grandmother's house was a little white shack located in the old Venice Canal district, about a block from the ocean. What once were the dreams of the city of Venice to emulate the canals of the Italian city were now nothing more than mossy, stagnant ribbons of smelly and turgid ocean water. Lining the decrepit canals were little houses much like Anita's grandmother's, and each house was as degenerated as the canals themselves.
Well, there's her place over there.
Anita pointed excitedly to the little house as she edged the large Buick over a small arched bridge. She turned right after that and pulled up to the front of the house, parking the car on the dirt.
This is going to be fun. We'll go down to the beach, and then they got this amusement section, games and things that we can go play at night.
Anita was like a little girl. Her eyes were lit with excitement. "No shit, baby," Johnny said as he got out of the car. He was trying his best to sound excited, but the plans that had been forming in his mind and the memory of his sister sitting next to the Duke only hours ago were still embedded in his mind. The three walked into the house. When Jane saw Buddy, she got excited and ran across the tiny living room and threw her arms around him. Johnny laughed when he saw Buddy smiling in embarrassment. "Hey, my man," Johnny said teasingly. "You do remember that night at the motel, don't you?"
"Oh, Johnny,"
Jane protested, but with a big smile on her face.
"Come on. I want you to meet Grandma."
Anita led them through the small two-bedroom house and out the back door. There, an old white-haired woman sat on a rocking chair with an easel in front of her. She was painting a picture of the canal that stretched out in front of her. The painting was so much more beautiful than the canal itself that Johnny could hardly recognize it. Anita introduced the old wrinkled black woman to Buddy and Johnny. When the old woman smiled, she revealed her gums. There were no teeth. Johnny liked the old woman instantly, more because of her painting than anything else. "I sure dig this picture, ma'am," he said with conviction. The old woman grinned broadly.
"Why, thank you a lot, son. It ain't but half through yet, but if you kids stay on long enough, I'll sure give it to you."
"Thank you. I dig that," Johnny replied, then knelt down and kissed the old woman on the cheek. Anita made some joke about being jealous, and everyone broke out laughing. The old woman sat there chuckling loudly and slapping her knees. The laughter and happy mood had continued through dinner, which consisted of old-fashioned grits and vegetables prepared by Anita's grandmother. It had continued through the evening when the happy young couples had joined other teenagers on the Santa Monica Pier. There they played the games at the arcades, and when Anita and Jane had finally begged, Johnny and Buddy had consented to ride the old-fashioned merry-go-round. On the way home, Johnny brought everybody some cotton candy, but once Johnny reached the little house by the canal, he suddenly became morose and serious. "I need the keys to the Buick, Anita," he said directly.
"Johnny, where you going?"
Anita was already reaching into her purse for her keys. "Me and Buddy got some business to attend to, baby. We'll be back in a couple of hours." Anita glanced at Jane, then finally handed the keys over to Johnny.
"Please,"
she began, then stopped as Johnny jumped into the front seat, with Buddy getting in on the passenger side. The happy evening ended abruptly for the two teenage girls, and both were in a state of confusion as they walked back into the little house. The Sunday night traffic was light as Johnny pushed the Buick across town toward Watts. Buddy rode in silence for a long time, but as they approached the ghetto district, he finally spoke. "All right, my man, what's happening?" Johnny glanced at his friend, lit a cigarette, then spoke slowly and with a coldness to his voice that Buddy had not heard before. "We're going to start paying back Duke where it hurts him most." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we're going to knock off the man's numbers houses one by one. We're going to clean the bastard out as fast as possible. Then when we got ourselves enough cash to live on for a while, we're going to get Leslie out of there, and all of us are going to head to Frisco. That's what I'm saying, man." "I dig where you coming from, man. But how we gonna hit those fucking houses without weapons? Your nunchaku's back at the apartment, right? Buddy hesitated before replying, yeah, it's back there under the bed. Okay, Johnny smiled, and I'll get myself a rod. I would use the nunchaku, but I want a fucking gun for this one, you dig? Shit, Johnny, we got ourselves a fucking long way to go. Buddy fell into silence. He had been anticipating something like this from his friend, and now that it had finally come, he wasn't sure how to take it. Taking on Duke and his men was a little more than Buddy had in mind. But once again, no matter what the young black's thoughts were, his devotion to Johnny overruled him. I'm with you all the way, Johnny, Buddy said after a long silence. Johnny turned to his friend and smiled. Thanks, Buddy, he said sincerely. Ain't many fucking dudes left like you in the world. Buddy grinned back, and the two teenage black men hooked thumbs and shook hands as if they were about to start a friendly game of football. After stopping off at the apartment and picking up the nunchaku sticks, Johnny drove for 52nd Street and turned left on Adams Boulevard. In another moment, he was pulling into a dark alleyway behind Wally's gun and ammo shop. Johnny left the car running with the headlights off as both boys jumped out and approached the rear entrance to the shop. There was an iron gate padlocked across the wood door. Johnny looked at Buddy and did not need to say anything. The nunchaku sticks fit nicely between the padlock and the gate. Buddy was silent for a moment as he held both ends of the stick. Finally, he cried out as he pulled with all his muscle against the lock. The steel snapped against the wood and pulled the frame right off the wall. Beautiful, man. Always beautiful, Johnny said as he pulled the gate open. Now all that stood between them and the store was the back door. Okay, my man, Johnny whispered to Buddy. Just one more time and we're home free. This time, Buddy slid the stick between the doorknob and the frame. Without hesitating, he yanked back and snapped the knob, and it's locked right out of the soft wood door. The gun store was there for the taking as the shattered door swung open. The two youths fled into the store. Johnny broke a glass case and pulled out a .357 Magnum, then took 3 boxes of cartridges. The weight of the gun, plus the presence of the shells, sent chills up his spine. Finally, he thought, as he and Buddy ran back to the car, I'm ready to get the Duke. As they sped away from the store, they talked excitedly about the robbery. The one thing that had upset both of them was the fact that there had not been an alarm. Johnny feared that the alarm was a silent one, rigged directly to the South Central Police Station. His fears were not unfounded, as a squad car was already being dispatched to the scene. Buddy knew exactly where to drive. They had both been there twice a night for the last couple of weeks, picking up the numbers tape for Duke. As Buddy slowed the car down in front of the dilapidated little house occupied by the two senile old ladies, Johnny loaded his Magnum. He knew he wouldn't need it now, but he was beginning to feel comfortable with the gun. It's gonna be a gas to knock over these old hags, Buddy declared as he jumped out of the driver's seat with his nunchaku stick flashing. It ain't gonna be much of a take, bro, but by the time we finish with the fucking route, we'll have some fucking real cash. Johnny and Buddy walked quickly up the walkway that they had first used many days ago when both had been honored and pleased to be collecting for the Duke. But the times had changed that, and now they were going after the man's money. The two old women let the collectors into the house without any argument. As far as they were concerned, everything was still as normal as it always was. As the saner of the sisters fished out the envelope from beneath the kitchen sink, Johnny looked around the roach-infested house and realized that it would be the last time in his life he would ever have to enter the decrepit place. As he glanced at Buddy, he realized that Buddy was also feeling the relief. "There you are," the old woman said, smiling wickedly behind her black, wrinkled face. You boys like a little taste? Nope. We got to hustle, Johnny said, backing out of the house as he had done every time they had collected. The old woman was worse than a leech, and once she got a hold, there was no letting go. Shit, Buddy said as they drove away. It's fucking worth it to knock off the Duke's houses, just so's we don't have to make that place again. My man, Johnny replied, fondling the white envelopes on his lap. I dig where you're coming from. They drove the route as usual and managed to collect from 7 more houses. The Duke had not even bothered to get the word out yet, since it had never crossed his mind that Johnny would be so bold as to attempt to rip him off. The usual people were inside the houses, and the rip-off was going easier than expected. Man, Johnny began as Buddy pulled up to the final house on the route. This shit's too fucking easy. I don't know. Don't sweat, bro, 'cause we just moving too fucking fast for Duke. Ain't no other explanation to it. But Johnny was worried. They had been doing the route now for at least an hour, and it was entirely possible that during that time someone had called or the Duke had called one of the houses. If that had happened, then they would be in real trouble. Let's just make it easy on this one, Johnny said as they climbed out of the car. We'll make it around the back first and just check it out. Buddy nodded, then followed Johnny to the rear of the old house. The freeway was nearby, and the sounds of trucks bringing their wares into the city to the north filled the night. As Johnny crept along the side of the house, he gripped his heavy pistol firmly in his hand. Tension had gripped his back, and his sore muscles were already aching. What's happening? Buddy asked as Johnny peered into the kitchen window. Inside the kitchen, there were rows of adding machines sitting on a table along the wall. 2 old men were stuffing envelopes with money. Everything looked as it should have. Nothing's happening, Buddy, Johnny whispered. But get yourself ready for anything, all right? I take it, Johnny, Buddy replied, clutching at his nunchaku. Johnny stood up straight and headed towards the rear door. He knocked 3 times and soon the door opened. Dave, the old black man who ran the house, faced Johnny.
Hey, Johnny, what's happening?
Dave asked. Instantly, Johnny was alerted. Dave was sweating profusely, and his eyes were darting off to his left as though he expected something to jump out of the woodwork. Not much, babe, Johnny replied, gripping his magnum tightly beneath his jacket. Okay, fuckers, up against the wall! The command came from behind Buddy. Instantly, Buddy whipped around and slashed at the black man's face with his hardwood stick. Stu was the smaller of the 2 bodyguards, and as he went down beneath the skull-crushing blow, he screamed a scream that was not human. Johnny heard Jonah, the huge black man, trying to get by Dave inside the kitchen. Instantly, Johnny slammed the back door closed and fired twice through the wood. The thunderous retort of the gun blasted out the glass windows, and the shells shattered the old wood of the door. Buddy, let's go! Buddy was still standing above his victim. The end of his nunchaku was bloody, and hair from the black man's skull was sticking to the wood. The smell of urine and excrement filled the air, giving testimony to the fact that Buddy had killed again. Johnny grabbed Buddy, and they ran alongside the house toward their car. Buddy jumped into the driver's seat, and Johnny into the passenger's. Within moments, they were screeching down Santa Barbara Avenue. The huge bodyguard, Jonah, had waited until he had heard the 2 youths running down the side of the house before moving out of the kitchen. He dropped the old black man to the floor, tried to keep himself from vomiting at the massive glob of the man's brains that rested on his pants, and ran from the house toward his car, which was parked in the alley. He saw the old Buick take off down the street and knew generally in which direction they were headed. Buddy drove like a madman down the empty streets as Johnny watched out the back window. When he saw the high-powered Cadillac turn out of the alleyway and immediately start gaining on them, he knew that he would have to do something. There was no way the old Buick would outrun the new Caddy. "Buddy! Buddy!" Johnny shouted. "Let the fucker catch us!" "What the fuck are you talking about? You crazy?" Buddy screamed. "No, man, do it! Do it, goddammit! Slow down!" Finally, Buddy took his foot off the accelerator and the car lumbered to a lower speed. Johnny, meanwhile, had leaned out the window, his waist resting against the door. He held his huge pistol with two hands, aiming it directly toward the approaching car. As the Caddy quickly came up to them, Johnny unloaded 4 rounds of booming shells into the Caddy's windshield. As soon as the last shot was fired, he threw himself back into the car. "Come on, man! Jam it!" he screamed to Buddy. As Buddy stomped down on the gas pedal and the old Buick slowly picked up speed, Johnny peered over the back seat and through the rear window. What he saw made him smile, a cold and brutal smile. The Cadillac was weaving madly back and forth on the street. The windshield was completely shattered. As Johnny watched the huge black Caddy move wildly toward the right, it continued on up the sidewalk and headed into a gas station. Hitting the gas pump head on, the car, along with the gas station itself, burst into a towering inferno of orange flames. They could see the flames behind them as they drove quickly toward Santa Monica. Johnny lit a cigarette and gave one to Buddy. They did not speak because both of them were filled with so much emotion that the words did not come. The few people who had heard the crash stood outside the danger area of the gas station and watched the spectacular fire. The first few who had arrived had listened with horror at the blood-curdling screams of the man who was obviously trapped for the brief remainder of his life inside the fiery car. I hate to have to do this, but we have to take a pause for the cause just because I need you folks to tune in to the next edition of Ralph Reads. I would like, or rather love, to thank you queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You may connect with me via Facebook, send a friend request, while you still can, to Ralph Anthony Garcia on Twitter and Instagram at RGMC2407. Send an email to rgmc2407@gmail.com, where if you would like to leave a small donation, please use the Zelle app or paypal.me/RGMC2407 or Cash App. My cash tag is RGMC2407. You may also connect with me on my other channel, RGMC Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, and right here on TURN. Tell a friend to tune in to the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you, and I love you like cooked food, and I will see you folks for the finale of this Donald Goines miniseries on Ralph Reads. Be a good person, regardless of what bad people do.